But on the pavements around Westminster Abbey, thousands had found it difficult to sleep. It's been a long vigil, and still their candles burned. But now came the time for thought, as they contemplated the next few hours on this day of sadness.
At the beginning, the mood was light, it was jolly, and over the last couple of hours, it's really changed dramatically.
In what way?
Everyone is just so struck with grief.
Well, it's now just after 6 o'clock in the morning, and we're outside the main entrance of Westminster Abbey, and these are the people who have been here for up to 48 hours. All kinds of people, young, old, all united in their determination to say a personal farewell to the Princess of Wales. Meanwhile, thousands more were pouring into London, to the coach and to the train stations, and into Hyde Park, where the funeral would be relayed on giant screens. Many had waited all night here too. And along the route they were making the last preparations for a princess. It was time for the final touches to the final tributes.
We're just ready, really. I mean, ready to see her come. We've been waiting and just not looking forward, but we're here to show her that we love her, to show that she's the people's princess.
I, talking to a family outside the House of Parliament, come down from Newcastle on the train, and they were just determined to come.
Outside Westminster Abbey, one of the clergymen due to officiate at the funeral service spoke with some of those who had gathered. The scenes, he said, were extraordinary.
Brits are usually not very good at this sort of thing, and suddenly the heart factor, as opposed to the head, has dominated everything. And it's a wonderful experience of unity, that it's where we are as human beings, ragged edges and all, that's where the start is. And today is an affirmation of our humanity.
And it was, of course, to be one more day of flowers for the princess. London can never have seen so many flowers. Police helped to line the route with the bouquets, and for them it was the beginning of a day of emotion from which they are not immune.
Especially if you start reading the cards. I've tried not to because we're supposed to, of course, keep an eye on the crowd and try and keep our demeanour, so I've tried not to.
But how do you think you'll cope with the day?
It will be difficult, but it's part of my duty, so I shall cope as best as I can.
It's now just an hour before the funeral cortege sets off, and along the route it's almost silent. There's a growing solemnity as the people wait for the coffin of the Princess of Wales to pass. And that will be the hardest moment of all. The moment all these people have come here for, yet one they can hardly bear to witness.
I bet you won't hear a pin drop when it goes by.
And so they waited, thousands of people, for mile after mile, lining the streets of London to say their quiet goodbye.
And so to the funeral itself. At precisely 9:08, the gun carriage carrying Diana's coffin began to emerge from Kensington Palace. James Mates describes its procession to the Abbey.
Surely the saddest sight the streets of London will ever see. The body of a princess carried from her palace on a gun carriage of the King's Troop Royal Artillery, flanked by the men of the Welsh Guards. The only sound, the clatter of hooves and the weeping of the crowd. More than 1 million had come to say a last goodbye, to offer up a final prayer. They stood shoulder to shoulder, 10 deep, always in respectful silence. The coffin shrouded in the royal standard, crowned by wreaths from the Spencer family and her 2 sons. Prince Harry's bearing the single word, Mummy. The Queen led the royal family to the gates of Buckingham Palace to salute the cortege as it passed. It was down the Mall that one summer's morning 16 years ago a young bride, a new princess, had been taken back to the palace. Today the sun shone again. Approached the Abbey, those privileged to have been among her friends were taking their seats. Imran and Jemima Khan, Tom Hanks and Steven Spielberg, Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman, Luciano Pavarotti. Hillary Clinton represented her husband. Lady Thatcher, just one of the former Prime Ministers to attend. Mohammed Al-Fayed, grieving for a princess and an eldest son. Diana's mother, Frances Shan Kidd. And finally the Queen and the Queen Mother. As they had left for the Abbey, the Union Jack, flying above Buckingham Palace, had been lowered to half-mast. A unique tribute, but this was a unique day. Behind the cortege, there now followed a procession not of the great, but of the good. 500 people marked out by their work for the charities closest to the heart of the princess. All now within earshot of the Abbey's tenor bell. A single muffled chime, counting off the minutes to 11 o'clock. The long journey from Kensington Palace was over. A nation was ready to be led in prayer. A nation commending her soul to God.
The service put together in a few short days was a perfect mix of ancient and modern, encapsulating the complexity of Princess Diana's life. There were guests from around the world, and political leaders rubbed shoulders with stars of screen and popular music. Her sisters both read appropriate lines of verse, but it was the uncompromising tone of their brother's address which brought spontaneous applause from those inside and outside the Abbey. Here's John Suchet with his reflections on a tradition-breaking ceremony.
Heads bowed as the coffin was taken down the main aisle. And the choir of Westminster Abbey lifted their voices. On top of the coffin, a simple card from Prince Harry, then a wreath placed by Prince Charles and his sons. The soprano Lynn Dawson sang from Verdi's Requiem. Diana's elder sister, Lady Jane Fellows, sounding so similar to her, read Time by an unknown author.
Time is too slow for those who wait, too swift for those who fear, too long for those who grieve, too short for those who rejoice. But for those who love, time is eternity.
The Prime Minister, Tony Blair, continued the theme of love by amending the lines on faith, hope and charity in Corinthians.
Love never faileth. But whether there be prophecies, they shall fail. Whether there be tongues, they shall cease. Whether there be knowledge, it shall vanish away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when that which is perfect is come, then that which is in part shall be done away. When I was a child, I spake as a child, I understood as a child, I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. For now we see through a glass darkly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then shall I know even as also I am known. And now abideth faith, hope, love, these three. But the greatest of these is love.
In the immediate aftermath of the crash, the paparazzi were blamed. A witness claimed he'd seen a bike swerve in front of the car. His evidence is now considered unreliable. The speedometer was said to be jammed at 120 miles an hour. It was, in fact, at 0. After 3 positive blood alcohol tests, the Ritz driver, Henri Paul, is now the focus of the inquiry. But for those close to Dodi and Diana, the press remain the real culprits.
I think if anyone is to be blamed, it should be whoever was hounding the car that night, because there's been an escalation throughout the whole period we were away, and it came to a head from Le Bourget all the way to the Ritz that night.
For the photographers, it had started as just a normal day, pursuing celebrities round Paris, where both sides knew the rules. But it turned into tragedy. They had no idea that they were following a driver who was under the influence of alcohol and prescription drugs.
C'est scandaleux. Scandaleux. On laisse pas un chauffeur conduire la princesse avec autant d'alcool dans le sang. C'est surtout à l'allure où il est roulé. Je veux dire, c'est de la folie. C'est de la folie. C'est un suicide.
A shrine to Diana has grown up over the tunnel where she died. The investigation may well last for months, but while the world awaits the findings, there's much public soul-searching about the press intrusion the princess endured to feed our appetite to know all about her life, a life cut tragically short.
night's Panorama replaced the originally scheduled edition, The Ultimate Taboo, which will now be shown at a later date.
John Major pinned his reputation on the pound.
He wanted to show that he was more of an Iron Man than Thatcher was an Iron Lady.
Then it crashed.
You can hear wave after wave of selling.
Panic set in.
We found we had not got sufficient control over events.
In the very eye of the storm, things are calm.
And the public had to pay the price.
Mortgage rates, no way.
They got it completely wrong.
Black Wednesday, the 5th anniversary, tomorrow 10:30 on BBC One.
Barry Norman talks to Mike Lee about his latest movie, Career Girls, and reviews Julia Roberts in My Best Friend's Wedding in Film 97 in 50 minutes. First on BBC One, a Japanese fan for Michael Palin. Full Circle.